This discussion is on low-input, nutrient-dense food, producing low-input, nutrient-dense food. Unfortunately, Trevor Harris had to pull out because he's feeling unwell. But we have three great farmers here, Thomas O'Connor, Thomas Fouhy and Andrew Bergin in the middle, and our host for the next hour and a quarter is Sean McGloin. Sean is the manager and I suppose the brainchild behind NOTS, National Organic Training Skill Set, and he's I suppose also the brainchild behind BioFarm, which is only in a few weeks' time. It's on the 9th of November. I'm sure most of you know BioFarm. I don't even need to promote it, and I'm sure Sean will say it, but it's an extraordinary conference with international speakers from all over the world, and it's just a great, you can sign into it online and watch it from the comfort of your home, which is, makes it really accessible for all of us to get the knowledge knowledge exchange going on. Anyway, Sean, I'll pass over to you for the next hour and a quarter, and then after that, I will invite Brendan Dunford up just to say a few words about Farming for Nature and the next steps. Okay. Big Bula bus. Yeah.
Is that for me? Thanks, everybody. And, you know, it's funny, when Brendan asked me to do this, I said, oh, yeah, that's no problem. But after coming after Hannah, I'm a bit more nervous than I expected to be, because normally I get somebody like her to do this. But anyway, we'll work along. Andrew Bergin has promised that if I get anyway stuck, he's going to pull me out, he says. So you're all very, very welcome. It's been a great, I've really enjoyed it, actually. I kind of feel bad now that I was down here at the Bar in 2009, we were talking about it last night, and I've actually missed all the Winterages programs, but from now on I've made a promise to myself it's going to be on my calendar, and I'm going to book in early, and I'm going to get my accommodation where we can solve the climate crisis in the pub over the weekend. So that's all good. But anyway, you're not here to listen to me, but to hear about the farmers and to talk about, and it almost sounds a bit weird, isn't it, low inputs to reduce high density food or nutrient density food, and it almost seems like there's something wrong there, and maybe that's why, and we'll hopefully thrash it out, that maybe that's why we don't get an awful lot of this. But we'll run through the farmers. We have loads of time now because we've only 3 farmers to work with, and Thomas Fouhy has very little to say most of the time. So, but I'm going to start anyway and get the farmers to explain what they do, and just a description for everybody on what your farms do. So Thomas, I might start with you over the far end.
Yeah, Thomas O'Connor. I have a 25-acre farm in Glona-Galton Camp. It's a mixed farming system. We've 13 acres of it under native Irish woodland. We have 4 acres that we produce fruit and veg on. We have 4 acres we call a permaculture field, which is apple trees, fruit trees, nut trees, berries. And we have another 4-acre field that is, we call it a permaculture field, that we're doing short-term coppice in. We took over the farm, bought the farm about 15 years ago. I used to be a publican. I sold the pub and I bought the 25 acres. Now, where the pub was below sea level, so it was a very good move. And at the same time, we took over an existing organic shop. We had gone to the Organic College in Drumcolor, spent a year there. And so everything we produce on the farm, is there an echo there? Come back, or is it just me?
It's fine.
Okay, that's grand. So everything we produce on the farm, we supply into our own shop. The food we ate became very important to us when we started learning about diet and the environment. I always tell people we're environmentalists that went back to farming because we could see the value in regenerating the land and have good quality food. There's no point having hollow food. We need food that's good, nutrient dense. They always talk about our ability to feed the world, and we need to produce more and more and more food. No, what we need to do is we need to produce better quality food. So we're 15 years into it, and it's working well, and I like the communities that we've come across and the people we've met. I think the problems we're facing in society and in the environment are extremely complex, but the solution is very simple. It's about going back to nature as opposed to going down a chemical and industrial path. So I've learned loads over the years. I've met some great people in this room. NOTS has played a big part of what we were doing on the BioFarm, and every step we take, we get further and further more confident about what we're doing.
Thanks, Thomas. Andrew?
It's a hard one to follow, Thomas. I'm based in County Kildare, in Athy in South Kildare, and I'm growing about 140 hectares of combinable crops. So a range of cereals, barley, wheat, oats, oilseed rape, peas, sometimes beans. And about 8 years ago, I began to transition stumbled into biological farming really by accident after maybe 25 years ago in a very conventional system on light, very, very alkaline land around the Thai, which is it's called boys' land often. It's very easy to work. You know, you can go out on it any day of the year, but it's quite tricky to actually grow a crop on it because it tends to lock up an awful lot of stuff. And unlike low pH land, you can't just toss a bit of lime out on it to cure that. And I was finding it harder and harder to get yields out of ground. We used to grow sugar beet when that was a crop, and I don't know whether it was coincidental with the loss of that. A lot of people in that area would think that, you know, it was harder to get yields when the beet was gone out of the rotation. But I got a demonstration of a no-till drill just to see how it would work, and it was a big light bulb moment, really. I just thought, from a logistical point of view, this was just so much easier. This wasn't, because as the soils got more depleted, the structure was gone out of them. So even though there were light soils, when we ploughed them, we had to apply more and more weight to reconsolidate them to get kind of even seed contact in the seed bed to get crops to grow. Otherwise, we ended up with stripy crops, and drought is a much bigger issue than waterlogging around us. So. And it was, in retrospect now, I can see that the soils, the structure was just gone out of them. There was absolutely no biological activity. There was no humus in them. But I didn't know much about soils then, because like I think most farmers, you're certainly not taught anything about soils, not in any of your conventional agricultural education. I liked what this machine was doing. I started doing more of it. I was very lucky to have met David Wallace and got to go to one of his soils courses, which really got things moving for me, because he explains in 3 nights, he explains a ferocious amount to you about what happens with soils. And I also got involved in the base organisation at the time, found more people who were doing the same thing, and really started to understand that I had to start building the biology in the soil in order for it to grow the crops for me, rather than putting inputs into a deepening hole, really, of further deteriorating soils. And I'm now 8 years from the beginning of that. All the ground is about 6 years at this stage, in a low-till system, using cover crops, using as diverse a rotation as I can, and watching the soil biology building. Now, I'm lucky enough to be part of the Danu EIP, which is looking at exactly this, the transition from conventional to biological farming. And I see we've got Dave Beecher here, who's our soil biologist, who's the guy who's really doing all the hole digging and measuring of what's in the soil, chemically, physically, and chemically, physically, and biologically, obviously. And it is a slow process, but the soils are beginning to improve. The crops are probably becoming a bit more even, and I'm learning an awful lot about farming. You know, I'm farming much more actively, so I try to reduce synthetic inputs as far as I can. I use less wasn't a huge nitrogen user by ordinary standards, but I use a lot less now. But this year I moved to liquid nitrogen, which all gets a carbon source with it, so humic or fulvic acid added to that chelated. This year I moved away from applied phosphorus completely, because again, with high pH soils, you lock up phosphorus very, very quickly. So I have high levels of phosphorus in the soil, but I have high levels of phosphorus because it's unavailable to plants, because it's quickly locked up. Now I'm brewing bacteria to try to solubilize that phosphorus, and I'm using sap analysis on the crops on a kind of fortnightly basis to see that I still have enough phosphorus. This year I applied a little bit of foliar to a winter wheat crop, but otherwise all the rest of it managed on what it got out of the ground. So that may be a honeymoon, and maybe next year it'll be trickier, but I'm going to try it again. And obviously with the price of fertilizer at the moment, it's a really good time not to be using as much of it. Fungicide use is gone down quite a bit, and certainly as crops are been more actively managed, you know, in a droughty year like 2020, practically no fungicides were used because there wasn't any need, and fertilizer was stopped in the month of May because, again, there was no point in applying anything more to crops that didn't seem to have the capacity to use it. And it was very interesting to see how well things yielded, actually, you know, on very small amounts. So it's probably more seat of the pants way of farming in ways, but it's a good deal more interesting and a good deal more engaging. I would like to get rewarded for producing something that may be more nutrient dense. I don't really have the proof yet that it's more nutrient dense. I'm developing interest in milling wheat off the farm from guys who realise I can't prove it's more nutrient dense, but are very interested in how we're producing it and are not so tied up that on needing organic certification, but are happy enough because I sell to a miller who sells to a craft baker who sells to a customer, and it's a really short chain, and any of them can come and see me and see what I'm doing. So I don't know if it's more nutrient dense. I hope it's going to be tastier for them, but it's getting some reward for the additional risks that we take in producing it this way, because it would still be safer to go back and do it conventionally, even if it would gradually deteriorate on me.
Okay, and Thomas?
Hi, I'm Tom Fouhy, and I'm from the Blackwater Valley in Cork, about halfway between Fermoy and Mallow. I'm probably, as Sean McGloin is probably throwing his eyes up to heaven here at the moment now, I'm a bit of, some people call me out there, but I farm 84 acres. I've taken on another 27 acres. I'm organic with 10 years. I'm stockless, bar 2 golden retrievers, and I do not have a fertility building phase in my organic rotation. I went into organics basically because I was too small to stay in conventional cereals. So I don't think I would be possible where I am, because today, only for working off the farm. I have a complex rotation, mainly spring crops. I do a huge amount of trialling of crops to see will they actually grow in Ireland. A lot of people throw their eyes up to heaven when they hear what I try. Some work, some don't work. That's what trialling is all about. The hemp trial did average, and my buckwheat did phenomenal. I have started to concentrate on protein crops and markets that for human consumption, and giving people an option other than meat and dairy products. So I would grow, I grow oats for flavins, of course, which I call my bread and butter, and wheat bean mix. Get a bean in from Finland. I grow lentils, which were extremely good this year. I tried chickpeas. I had mixed results in them. Linseed, like I said, buckwheat, triticale, small amount of sunflowers, and the lupins did exceptionally well this year, probably the year that was in it maybe. But why am I growing all of these? I'm growing all of these so that I want to try and make the farm as profitable as possible. I want to build the soil biology. I basically want to bring the life back into the soil. I want to be able to sequester carbon, break down the carbon. I think Sean McGloin called me a carbon cowboy there one day, but basically what I do is I sequester carbon, I get my biology to break it down, and I use that for nutrients for the following crop. So I'm hoping to sequester a small amount of carbon. Okay, I don't think it's possible to actually sequester a large amount of carbon and still take off a high nutrient dense crop off it at the time. Okay, there's a balancing act between two of them, and the more life you bring back into the soil and the more conditioning you get back into it, probably you will turn a certain amount of the carbon back into humus and things like that, Sean. So what it's actually after doing is giving me the chance to put in the crops earlier and increase yields. No. Everything has its pros and cons and things like that, right? So, basically trying to bring an awareness to Ireland that crops can be grown in an organic situation. Okay, they take time. I've basically done a lot of trialling at my own expense, and there was only one way to find out. No one else is finding out about it. So I decided, why don't I give it a try? So that's where I am with my farm at the moment.
Okay. It strikes me, though, that Andrew alluded to it and what his inputs were, but Thomas, and I'll call Thomas and Tom, it'll be a lot easier. Tom, what would your inputs be in an organic system that and I suppose maybe from a cost perspective, or what's costing you money for inputs?
Well, I drew 10 loads of seaweed last year and made compost out of it. And 2 years ago, I brought in basalt rock dust. And about 4 years ago, I spent about 60 quid on mushroom mycelium. So that's generally, so our output off the farm is based on very low inputs coming into it. It does take a lot of work and it's less extensive than an intensive system. But the way I looked at it from the start is that I wanted to create biological complexity on the farm. And I knew if I did that, then that would reflect in the nutrient density of the plant. So again, like I say, it's about going back to nature and complex systems. And all those complex systems, whether it's a diversity of plants and biology in the soil, all are producing different minerals and chemicals. And then with the mycelium and all that feeding back together, that goes into the plant. And over the last few years, I can definitely see the difference in the health of my plants, and there are less of a susceptibility to pests and disease. I'm certified organic, no insecticides, herbicides, pesticides, because I knew from the start if I wanted to build the biology, I need to get rid of anything with debt in the label, anything with a side in it. I use permaculture and biodynamics, as many principles as possible around natural farming systems. We use compost tea, so like it depends on the year what we're doing. We could be doing anything, but we'll try absolutely everything.
But yours is very low.
Our inputs are very, very low. We don't have massive outputs, but it'd be the same as a conventional veg, on a smaller scale, but mixed systems. So I don't have a monoculture of a crop. I have mixed cropping systems as I go through.
And I suppose, Tom, the same for you. Are you importing?
I chop all my straw. A small amount of it goes to a neighbour across the road who has for horses, which I in turn get back in again.
As farmyard manure.
And farmyard manure. When I did the Master, Sean, we discussed this before. I actually came across a paper stating that the Northern Hemisphere in Europe and that there's enough of natural P and K in the ground between 600 and 800 years. So I looked at it myself that the soil biology is the only thing to basically break down that, make it available for the plants. So basically I said to myself, how am I going to boost the biology for the stores that are locked up in the ground to make it available for myself? Now, I am sitting, my land would be sandy silt, loam. I would have limestone. I'm sitting on limestone, John. So it dries out quite a bit. So I came in, my ground, I got it tested when I went into organics. I had an organic matter in the ground of 1.6%. Basically, I had no organic matter, okay? So when we went to Scotland that time, and do you remember, Jane, when we did, we brought in soil samples to see what organic matter was at the time then. Okay, and at that stage, my organic matter at that stage was gone up to 3.7%.
Okay.
Okay, so what I am doing at the moment is, and like Thomas said it there, some of my crops are used not only to produce a protein crop and as a cash crop, but the likes of lupins have a most phenomenal effect on mycelium in the ground. Okay, you have an explosion of mycelium which basically will break down the hardest carbon straw you have after that, and once you build that up through rotations, basically speaking, you have the food side web and it's absolutely humming inside the ground. So I'm using the natural nutrients in the ground, Sean. Last year I brought in a small amount of farmyard manure as a trial situation, but other than that, right, I'm actually not import. 3 years ago I tried 100 kgs of microtop as a salt, and I did that for boron, but other than that I don't import anything not of any description.
Okay, and then Andrew, you because you're not organic, so you have a little bit more liberty to play around, but you've been telling me before about this, that you've actually continually decreased your inputs, and that you said there that your systems were so badly depleted. So yield-wise then, how does your biological output, we'll say, from your farm, we'll say, compared to, we'll say, when you were saying before, we'll say 9 years ago, for argument's sake?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, obviously you've got to average out because every year is different. But yeah. I would think it has recovered. I'm producing yields that are closer to what I was producing, say, 12 to 15 years ago, if you take on average. But I'm doing it with
Reduced inputs.
with reduced inputs. Now, I am spending a bit more on trace elements because I'm trying to balance stuff. I'm trying to really keep crops healthy. If there's a deficiency, I'm trying to keep crops healthy with by addressing deficiencies rather than pouring medicines onto them. I am still using some sides which I'd rather not be, and the longer this goes on, the harder it gets to use those. And the question does come up occasionally, at some stage do you step off the conventional? And I suppose I probably didn't have your courage, Tom. I would have thought my soils were too depleted to I didn't think I could have succeeded at organics. I don't know now if I could, to be honest with you.
You can, it's opening up again next year.
Hold my hand, Tom.
After buy a farm, you'll be definitely.
So,
Can I
Thomas, yeah.
So when we took over the farm, the first thing I did is plant loads of biomass, because I realised what I was going to be a carbon and a light farmer. That anything I grew on the farm was going to be carbon based, so I need to accumulate as much carbon as possible, and also that I need to make as much use of the light as possible. So it's about multi-dimensional layers. So when we look at our fields, we're literally farming one dimension of the ground. If we start introducing hedgerows and different heights of plants and shrubs and stuff like that. And then in my orchards, I also have geese and chickens, and I do flat mulching. So when my geese are roaming around the orchard, they're going up into, and the chickens up into a mulched floor. And then that mulched floor, they're dropping the nutrients and they're grabbing the grass. I'm turning that into compost and I'm moving it down onto the veg, because the veg section is more intensive. So I'm moving nutrients around the place, but creating a lot of biomass in the start. And again, this is where the mushrooms played a big part, because they speed up the whole process of digestion. Like, the way I looked at it is that back at the time of the dinosaurs, there was animals the size of this building, and there was plants 3 times the height of it, and there was no interference. That was just nature. It was accumulation of minerals and light. So I think we can by going back to nature and learning and understanding a bit more about it, we can move the nutrients around our farm using animals. Like in my orchards, my worm count quadrupled just by simply getting geese in. So while I don't have animals on the farm, like cows or sheep, I do have geese and ducks and chickens, and 4 geese can do the work of a goose and 4 geese can do the work of a cow in converting that into the ground. And animals play a huge role in our system as part of the digestive process, but also like the cow when it's ruminating its gut, that's the inoculant to the soil. That's why most cultures hold animals sacred, is because they had that vital role of every year inoculating the soil and building up the biology on top of it. So they pre-digest the food that we can't eat, and then that feeds onto the system. So there's like lots of layers and stuff happening, but for me, fixing carbon was number one. So planting as much as biomass as possible, making as much use of the light as possible, and then finding the quickest way to digest that down so it's available to the plants.
Okay, and you're recycling nutrients rather than bringing in new ones.
Yeah,
but I suppose that takes us to the next question then, is if we all agree that it's possible in a biological system to reduce inputs, how are we going to work out then that our food is nutrient dense? Like, we talked a lot about Dan, what's his name? Kittredge, and he promised us a couple of years ago he was going to have this app, for want of a better word, that was going to solve our problems, and we got very excited about it. But I've been emailing him, and I haven't seen anything yet. So
well, it's actually they've released a second prototype, and you can sign up and you can get the device and feed, and they're doing a lot of database searches around the world. So I'd say that technology will come on in the next year or two anyway.
Yeah, I'd say it is. Yeah, I think he was talking about it 2 years ago. That's the only thing. I suppose we've been getting a little bit excited about it. But in the absence of that, how do we know what our food is nutrient dense? And is it like, there's a conventional dairy farmer in Leitrim who does raw milk. And I always think he went to once a day milking, and he said to me, his cows, you got up to it right away. He said it took him 6 weeks because he was 50 years milking twice a day. He says, but the thing for him was the big difference was that the cows came into the yard jumping and playing. He said he never seen it in his life before. So does that impact then on the nutrient density of food if you have a happy animal that moves? And it's almost, I would have always thought it was almost counterproductive to have a cow that gets milked once a day, given that a calf in a natural system would suck on her 4, 5, 6 times a day. But anybody that does once a day will always tell you the cows are far happier. And I think Sean Condon down there was telling me he has a cow now that she's in her, all going well, 18th lactation. like where I think a normal conventional dairy model is 1.5 or 2 averages. So animal welfare and all that. But how do you measure if your food, how do you know, Thomas Fouhy, if your linseed is better than the one that's in the bottom shelf of Lidl or Aldi? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's kind of a complex question as well, because you could look at it on different levels. Number one, is it sourced locally, is it food miles and whatever, but if you broke it down to every plant has a certain yield capacity, call it in the wild or in natural yield capacity, and if those seeds were tested at that, Sean, and you get your protein and the nutrient density, then you have something to go off of, okay? They did something very similar like that in Holland, whereas they looked at, in fairness, they looked at organic and biodynamic vegetables, and they looked at the conventional vegetables that were basically looked like they were twice the size and whatever and stuff like that. And a lot of basically what you were buying is, as one guy said, was you were paying quite a lot for water. Okay, so it was a bit like you ended up, the nutrients were the same, but they were watered down because of the size of the vegetables. Okay, so basically you were buying water.
Yeah.
They didn't say, and in fairness, they didn't say that conventional vegetables were bad for you. They just said, gram for gram, you probably have to eat more of them to get the same nutrient value as vegetables that were not pushed by artificial fertilizers.
Yeah, but if you look at, Garage made a point there earlier on about the difference, we'll say, between cows grazing outside and zero grazing cattle. Now, at the moment, all that system, it doesn't matter if Revo buys your milk off you, whether you're zero graze, it all goes into the one packet and nobody knows the difference, although there might be a picture of a cow outside in the sun on the side of the carton. But is there anything, we don't have, I suppose, a lot of proof to say that the cow with the sun on her back produces healthier milk? Or I don't know if, or anybody from the audience, if they have any input on this, by all means.
I think what we need to do is we need to, first of all, just use our senses. Instead of just using our eyes to look at our food, look at the flavour and the taste and the enjoyment we get out of it. Look at the health and the condition of the animals or the people that are consuming it, and look at the health and the environment that the food is coming out of. But then on top of that, you can be measuring different bits and pieces that come off it. But you should be able to tell the quality of the food. You can tell the quality of the food by how many pests and diseases you have on it. Because if you have a good healthy plant with complex chemistry, well then you don't have a pest disease because the pest can't digest it. So observation of it can make a big difference. Like we're running our store for 15 years. I produce my own produce, we buy off others and we import. And so lots of food. I handle lots of food all the time. And if a box of apples that are biodynamic and organic come into the shop, I don't even have to look at the label. I can tell by the look at them and hold them in my hand. We've lost the skills of understanding and the sensitivity around the taste of our food and the quality of our food. But you have good healthy food when you have good healthy people. So again, the other thing is short supply chains, local food systems. So I know my food is nutriently dense because I put the energy, the effort into it. I've made sure all the minor minerals and elements are in the soil so the biology of the plant can take it up. But then also I know my customer's getting that food in a short period of time. I'm harvesting that food when it's at its ripest, as opposed to the food being harvested and then ripening in transit or in a gas situation and stuff like that. So apart from a Nutrimeter and technology that'll come and tell us this, we can use our instinct and our gut to tell us from the health of our animals and the health of the people eating it and the enjoyment that they get out of eating the food.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. And I remember an agronomist saying to me, he says, if you buy, he says, and the stem broccoli, for example, and it comes from Spain, he says, I don't give a hoot whether it's conventional, organic, or anything like that. By the time that arrives, 4 or 5 days in transit, another 3 or 4 days in a chill. By the time that it's in somebody's eating it, he said the nutrient density value of that is probably zero in reality because it's done so much travel and it's not a whole plant. It has been cut. So, but how, if we talk about nutrient dense food, is taste the best? Is taste and look at the moment our best indication of what that is, or do we rely on customer feedback to verify that? Because how do you sell that? How do you stand up and say, well, my food, my oats that's biologically farmed is better than your oats with all your inputs on it, or your vegetables? How do we, I suppose, maybe widen that out to the larger population?
Well, my own thing is the experience of the customers eating the food and they coming back. Like, we used to close for 3 weeks now. Not we haven't done that in years, but we used to close for 3 weeks a year over Christmas. And our customers would end up going to Aldi or Lidl, and they'd be coming back to us then, and they'd be queuing at the door to come back in, because in the space of the 3 weeks of eating. So not all organic food is equal. You could have industrial organic food, which means that it's just not poisoned, but it mightn't necessarily have the complexity in the soil or the plants to ensure it's nutrient dense. And a lot of the time when they do the trials, it's industrial organic versus industrial commercial, as opposed to small scale. So you could be a non-organic farmer growing on a small scale, paying loads of attention to your soil and your environment, and producing good healthy food off that, and it could be way more nutrient dense.
Yeah, I read recently was that General Mills in the States now are only going to take grain, isn't it, from regenerative farmers, which is probably the first major step, or else they're going to pay a premium, I can't remember which it is, but to looking at nutrient-dense food. You know, but again, is that more about, we'll say, the likes of Base or Danu saying, well, look, this is how we do things, and it's a marketing element onto what they're doing? Do you know what I mean? That you have to know, it's a bit like what you were doing in your short supply chain. You're selling that story as much as anything else about how you do things. And in the same way, like I was on one of the Base lads' farm last week, and he had mixed species cover crops this size. But what was really struck me as interesting was when you actually dug down and smelt the soil, it actually smelled like almost that forest floor, you know, that really good, healthy. And he made a really interesting point to me. Well, he made quite a few interesting points, and I don't want to throw it away because he's going to be an output in the video. But he made the point that this is for farmers. This is for, if you're a fertilizer salesman, if you're a machinery salesman, there's nothing for you in biological, because there's very little inputs that you can sell somebody. And is that maybe the problem, in the sense that if all the agribusiness models that wants to sell you something, and you can argue this for organic as well, isn't there to make money off you? No, there's nobody wants to promote this model, or there's very little interest. Now, I do think climate change is coming, and that's going to probably change that. But what do you think?
I think that is the advantage of it, though, is because our farmers are squeezed in the middle. Huge amount of inputs and very little price for what they're selling. It's just a commodity and not a food. What we need to do is, our farms are like leaky buckets. There's a load of inputs going in, and the people that are framing our policy and the way we run our farming systems are the people making the money out of it, not the farmer. So we need to make the farmer more independent by reducing the inputs. And yes, there might be one industry or two industries dropping off. There mightn't be as many inputs sold, but the food will be of better quality. The nutrient density of our food has decreased since World War I and World War II. What happened after that, in World War I and World War II, is industrial and chemical agriculture took over our farming systems. In 1924, biodynamics was started by Rudolf Steiner. It was followed on by organics. Why? Because at the time, after a very short introduction of industrial agriculture, they could see a decline in the quality of food. The US Army and the British Army have dropped the standard of the health of their soldiers at least 2 or 3 times in the last 50 years. Why? Because the populations are getting weaker and sicker, because the food and the environment is getting more polluted and less minerals and nutrients in it. So we can see from the past the trace the fact that the introduction of chemical and industrial agriculture has directly led to a degradation of the minerals and nutrients inside in our soil, and we can see it in our populations too, and in our people and our animals.
Yeah, but if we can't measure it, how do we know what's happening? You know what I mean? How would I know what? Like, you mentioned your Wakeland cereals to us today, or was it last night we were talking about it? And that's probably not as a high yielding product, but it probably has a better value because it's perceived to have a better nutrient density.
It is, or at least certainly that's what I'm trying to persuade the people who are buying it. Yeah, because it yields about 25% less. So I need to get that much more, and everyone else along the chain needs to get that much more. Some of this is you're selling a story. It's not a story that you're making up. It's true, and the care that it's produced with extra care, and it's produced in an environment that has an awful lot more life in it than it used to have. There's bird life, there's insect life. You know, there's a lot of visible life, which I'm taking as a pretty good sign that the invisible stuff is improving as well. I'll see it's early days with that one. Just as you're talking there, it occurs to me, how do we know that the food is more dense? I had an interesting experience about this time last year. I save my own seed for everything that I can. For some contracts, you have to buy the seed, but generally I'll save my own seed. I'll clean it and sometimes put a biological dressing on it, so something like vermijuice or seaweed or that to speed up the relationship between the seedling and the soil. But I got a call middle of October last year from a neighbour who was actually doing some trials himself with seed, and he had bought some certified seed that was undressed, which is kind of unusual because generally they come with a standard prophylactic fungicidal dressing. And so he had some with the standard fungicidal dressing, and he sowed that in part of the field. He sowed some undressed certified seed from the same merchant in another part of the field, and then he used some biological dressings on the rest. But he ran out with a corner to sow, and I had a bag of the same, of my own seed, undressed, just straight off the combine at home. So he came and got it. And he gave me a ring in December and said, "You want to come out here and have a look at this?" And the field is on a bit of a hillside. And as you looked across it, you could see it looked pretty even until you got over to this corner. And I didn't know where my seed was sown. And it was about 3 shades darker in green and healthier, larger crop. And we watched it through the year. And he doesn't have a yield monitor in his combine, but he's been cutting corn for a long time. He figured there was about an extra 1/4 of a tonne an acre out of that. Now, there could be various reasons. There could be the fact that the seed was grown in he's on a different soil type, although he's not far from me. It could have been that it was grown on a similar soil type and then was somewhat adapted to it in a kind of an epigenetic way. I don't know. Or it could just be that it was better seed, because most of our seed is, the standards for seed production are high in terms of purity, but they pay no attention to how the crop is grown otherwise or what sort of soil it's grown in. And if you think about it, your seed is very, very important. It's the start of your crop. I'm much happier with the home-saved seed that I'm getting. I think I'm getting much more even crops. So there is, I don't know how I turn that one around and sell it, because I can't even sell my neighbour a bag of seed. But it tells me that there's something good happening in there.
And maybe that's the observation of farmers as well, that can make the distinction between what is a healthy crop and what is not a healthy crop.
Yeah, let's say cropping in Ireland and in Europe is all down to yield, Sean. So farmers are growing the crop that will give them the most tons per acre, they're not interested in nutrient density or anything like that. But the likes of, let's say, premium wheats and things like that, let's say like the red wheats in Canada and stuff like that do premium breads. Premium breads have to be, there's a link between protein and the gluten content in wheat and the quality of it and things like that. I grow quite a bit of emmer now, right? And it actually does quite well. But you see, because it's an ancient grain, right? Conventional agriculture cannot deal with these types of crops because it is not designed to take up artificial fertilizers and fungicides and things like that. It will not increase yields as such. But what you end up on them, and any time they have been tested and things like that, is you do have a way more nutrient dense grain, and you do have a grain with a way higher protein content. So it's breeders are breeding for yield rather than breeding for nutrient density. So what you had said there is, what is biodynamics or organic farming bringing to the table? You don't have the Passat driving in the yard with the guy with his laptop trying to sell you something, okay? Which means that we're really of no interest to a lot of people. From that point of view, what has happened is a demographic of a consumer has become a lot more educated. So all of a sudden they're looking at going, we would like to try these product lines. So what you end up then is you have an outlet for a product. But what's happening on the other side then is, if you said, what do we need to do, or what is the biggest fallback in any of this, would be to bring all this is education from the farmer's point of view of growing it, agronomic advice, and also from the consumer's perspective.
And will there be a value to the farmer for getting that premium price, do you think, for a nutrient-dense product? Or is this 3, 4, 5 years away in terms of people making the value? COVID has thrown a huge, I don't know what your word for it, but you start to see trends now where people are rethinking their whole position in life and their whole thing about their health and the quality of life, and are looking, I do believe, looking to seek nutrient-dense food. And I'm just wondering, has the demand for those products jumped forward now a couple of years, maybe more than we anticipated because of COVID and people's reflections?
I definitely agree with what you just said there. Definitely. COVID has a lot of minuses, but the plus that COVID has done is, well, maybe not everyone making banana bread, but I'm just saying, everybody started baking at home. Everybody went back and going, oh, the scones I bake now are nicer than you buy in the shops. And an appreciation of food, an appreciation of quality of food. And Thomas had said there about nature and bringing the whole thing together. Okay, half the farm is conventional, and I would have the rabbits refuse to eat at one side of the ditch, but they will eat my stuff. Okay, and they would refuse to. There was a cover crop outside the ditch from another farmer, and he had a cover crop with linseed and a mixes in it. But the very minute my linseed was ready, I had every small bird in the country. I didn't have to tell myself, is it time to cut it? I had every bird in the country telling me, give us a few days before you pop in and do it, because they know what they want. So it's amazing. Nature will actually say, right, they didn't come along and say, right, the wheat here, or the pigeons love lentils, right? The wheat here, the lentil. They didn't look and see on the back of the pod going, I wonder what's the protein content in this, and the starch value and stuff, like energy content, whatever. They know. It's a bit like Tom said. Yes, it's like when you catch an apple, you eat an apple. I could put wheat into my mouth, and I know it. And you can put wheat in a conventional farmer's into your mouth, and you chew it. It's amazing what intuitive skills people have, but they've actually lost.
I've no doubt that as we go down the road, there'll be equipment that'll be a lot easier for the consumer to know about the nutrient density of the food, and they'll know about the importance of it. But there are many advantages to the farmer for focusing on nutrient-dense food, even if the consumer doesn't realise it, because they've healthier crops, they've a healthier environment, they're more resilient to pests. And then we have the whole issue about our seeds. Saving your own seed, absolutely phenomenal. Epigenetics, every generation adapts to your environment. We now have seed stocks that are hybrids or this, that and the other. They have been bred for generation after generation and inbred in order to take up soluble fertilisers. And in taking up soluble fertilisers, they're taking up a very small amount of minerals. I think there's a thing called non-protein nitrogen or something. There's a very big difference between a plant taking up the nitrogen that comes from an artificial chemical fertiliser and then taking up a protein nitrogen that was created by biology inside in the soil. So our seeds are extremely important, which is why you can see around the world there's an awful lot of grab to our seed and our seed companies. 98% of our seed companies are gone. The varieties and variations we used to grow are gone. These were all seeds that were adapted to the soil and the biology. So if you have a seed and it's grown generation after generation in the ground, it knows how to work that soil of that farm, and it knows how to work with the biology in that soil in order to release the minerals and the nutrients. And then if we replace the minerals, which we must do because we've been mining the soil for the last 100, 120 years, literally mining everything out of it and selling it off, if we can bring in the minute amount of trace minerals and elements to get back into that system, well, then you get healthier, nutrient-dense food. So it's not the top 10 minerals that are there, the major and the minor. It's also these tiny, tiny, minute traces that make the difference between enzymes working in your body and inside in the plant and health. So we need to look at our seeds and our genetic breeding, and we must take more of it back onto the farm so it evolves on the farm.
And just to add to that, the remaining seed companies are almost all owned by chemical companies now.
Yeah. So that's another problem. And anybody, have we questions? Oh, question over here on the...
Great debate. I'm just saying, well, just to add, what education seems to be the key. Educate the public to what you're saying, do you get me? And they will, because like it just makes so much sense. Thank you very much.
I think educating the public on one level, but experiential education as well. So walking on the farm and knowing what good food tastes like. Most people don't know what good food tastes like because their food system is full of sugar and is full of all chemicals and additives. They're there to trick you into thinking it's tasting good. So people need to go back, and again, it starts in schools. It starts them knowing how to cook for themselves. It starts them growing the veg, understanding and appreciate it, and then you develop the tastes. So like we'd nearly need a rehabilitation of people's taste buds in order for them to appreciate what good nutrient-dense food is again. But you're right, it's education, it's on the ground, it's getting people to learn and engage in it, and that starts in the schools.
Yeah, it seems. It seems there's no problem finding misinformation, but it's a lot harder to find the real information about everything. Yeah.
Thank you. Terrific, marvellous and very important discussion. This is a discussion about the nutrient density of food is, for me, it's absolutely essential bit of the jigsaw, essential to the viability of organic farming and biodynamic farming and everything else as well. And when you think of it, what's the whole raison d'etre for growing food? It's to grow food so we can nourish people, that we can produce something that actually nourishes people. The actual information is there. They've been actually taking readings from and monitoring the nutrient density in food right back to the 1930s, 1940s. And it's absolutely terrifying to see the diminishing, nutritionally, how nutritionally deficient a lot of our vegetables and meat and fruit and all of that is. There has a fraction of the nutrients in them that it did in the 1940s and 50s. I heard somebody, the Sustainable Food Trust, the other day saying that basically we're lucky if there's 50% of the nutrients in a lot of our food that there used to be. That's just in the 1950s. But just a couple of little anecdotal things, and anecdotal, the word anecdotal is a swear word to a scientist, but anyway, just at I ran a cooking school down in East Cork, and basically we would have students there for 3 months at a time, and for years we've been watching their change in their health and various things over 3 months. But just the other day, one of the students up out of the blue said to me, "How come I need to eat less while I'm here to feel full?" And also another one said, "Well, I find that I used to eat loads of snacks. I don't seem to need the snacks anymore. I feel fuller." And so in a way, that was very interesting. I mean, that would be our observation anyway, that basically often when you're eating food that is very nutrient dense, you may not know the actual measurement in it, but you actually need to eat less of it. As even with this, like for example, sourdough bread now is becoming much more widely available. And you eat one slice of really good, real sourdough bread. There's a lot of faux sourdough around, but anyway, and you feel full. You may not be even thinking about it, but you feel full, and you eat 3 or 4 slices of sliced pan, and somehow nothing happens in the same sort of way. Actually, the other thing that's difficult is, so it's possible to get the food, but difficult to get the food tested for nutrient density. And hopefully the spectrometer is around the corner for us, and that'll be a big game changer when it comes. But I have found there's a reluctance to actually get it tested. I remember another anecdotal thing would be, we noticed that with organic chickens and with organic pork, it's a whole different, much more stable product than something that's produced very intensively. I couldn't get the research done on it because it was like they didn't really want to find out I was right. Do you know what I mean? So it's actually, there seems to be a bit of resistance. Now, some of you, hopefully, if you have links to scientists who will actually test the vegetables or whatever for nutrient density, perhaps we can all work together on that. It can be done, but at the moment it doesn't seem to be done. But think of the difference if you can say to somebody, you need to pay a little bit more for this because actually it's going to nourish you much more. It'll have much more vitamins, minerals, trace elements in it. And I am convinced that it has. But basically that's no good. It's just anecdotal. We have to have it scientifically proved.
I'd like in time to be selling produce inside in my shop based on its weight, what it is, and its nutrient density. And then that we can regulate ourselves to a point where, like, if I'm buying something off of someone, I know what I can produce myself as a farm, the quality I can put into it. And if I'm buying and someone's producing the same quality as me, well then, so we need to pay the food according to its nutrient density. I think it'll be a game changer when that stuff comes in because people can walk into the supermarket and they'll be able to tell what's in it.
But
You might have a choice, sorry for a second. You might have 2 things side by side, and crop in the US, they have 3 different options. Maybe for chicken produced in a certain way, organic, pastured, blah, 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 3 different prices. So you could have organic or whatever, and a little story, and then people can make a choice. They can make a choice. Sorry.
No, and I think you're right. Is one of the things that I think is interesting. You mentioned labelling, and I know if I'm producing a product for the market, and you have to go, you're legally required to go and get it a label, and that is, I suppose, perceived to be the nutrient value of that. They don't necessarily say density, but the nutrient value of it. But as far as I know now, I can be stand correct on this, is that's run through a computer. And if it's milk, for example, the computer tells you that the standard nutrient value of milk is this. And if yours meets that requirement, that's the label it gets. I think that's the way it works. It doesn't actually measure true nutrient value or true nutrient density, I think.
They were measuring it before computers.
Oh, absolutely. But I think this is the system we're in at the moment. I think we're in that. So organic milk with cows that are on the nicest ground you'll ever get is going to have the same probably label as milk that comes from a zero grazing system that's fed on sugar beet or soya from South America, whatever. Do you know what I mean? I think that's one of the issues. It's a lot easier in Thomas's situation maybe to change that because he's in a very short supply chain. But the likes of Andrew or Thomas that's selling into the bigger market, unless the likes of Guinness or some of them decide, well, we're looking for something else here, and that has to be a market-driven approach, will nutrient density become a big thing? And I don't know about that.
But it's not so much nutrient density either, Sean. It's the quality. Let's say you take even the likes of, for Darina there, she was baking with the likes of ancient grains, okay? It's not so much the protein content and things like that. They're able to mine trace elements and minerals that your conventional wheats won't do, okay? So you're actually getting those into your body as well rather than having to take supplements and things like that.
But
right?
is that not a nutrient-dense food then?
Well, you could call it nutrient and mineral and complex dense food.
Complex density.
And the same with veg.
And the thing about measurement as well, like, is grain is paid by the measurement of protein. But in the States, you turn around and your grain isn't sold by the weight, it's sold by the volume. And that's a trick of the system. So you have 2 farmers, one is putting good quality grain into the system, one is putting poor quality. They're still paid by the volume of what they produce rather than the density of it. But then also, if you turn around and a new practice is desiccating the grain with glyphosate, that creates a chemical reaction, and they get paid more for that because when it's tested as if it's got more protein. So something that's force dried with a glyphosate will get paid more on its protein content than someone that's grown a grain that has diversity in nutrient density or complexity and a little bit less protein in it. And Trevor Harris, he's not here now, but he was saying when he put his grain into the distillery, the biodynamic and the organic grain, they couldn't believe it. So there was no testing of it there, but what they saw is that it ran through all the machines. They didn't have to clean the filters, the end product there was no clogging up because of the complexity inside in the grain when it came out. So the quality of the whiskey and the byproducts from the people processing it, they'll be able to tell you the quality of the product.
But our food production system probably isn't necessarily designed to accommodate nutrient density. But
of course not. No.
But on the contrary of that, if we can, as farmers, come up with almost an observational system on what our crops look like, or whether it's livestock or it is, that we can tell that story, is that as best we can do? Like, I'll give you the example now, and this is only a minor one, but during lockup I said the lads are coming home from school now and they're going to be looking for money all summer to do stuff with them. So I said they're going to work for the money. So I built a hen house and I bought 50 hens, and I had sowed species rich, or mainly clover, through the grasses in February. So I actually had a kind of a half decent sward, and we had orchards and we had little things like that. And then we produced kefir in another business. So we had waste kefir. So I started, the organic feed was there ad lib, and I started doing soaking the kefir overnight, just a small amount, and the hens get this every morning, and they were going berserk for it. Like, I couldn't believe the 2 things happened. First of all, the amount of ad lib feeding reduced probably 40%, I would imagine. But the problem was they started to jump over the fence if I wasn't out early enough in the morning for the oats. But we started selling it in the farmers market, and everybody said, "Oh, this is great," you know. And it's only for the summer for the kids. But when they were going back to school, I built an honesty box. But I was actually taken back by the approach, because we now are running out. We need another 20 hens to keep the supply chain going. But a couple of people took photographs of the eggs, and they compared them to organic eggs, normal organic, industrial organic eggs, and there's a complete and utter difference. But I have now people coming to our box late at night, and these are regular people. These aren't. There was one guy there last week. He's an electrician. He said, and he's 32 mile away. He told me, and he comes now and he buys a tray of the eggs, because he says he can't get eggs like them anymore. Now, I would imagine our eggs are very nutrient dense, because they're floating through clean grasses, and they get the key for the thing. I don't know how big a difference it makes, but it struck me that, and I'm charging nice money, like I'm charging €3 for 6 eggs. It's not like it is, but nobody has an issue with it. It's quite interesting, you know.
People know what quality is.
Yeah.
Like when we got the first batch of chickens we got ate by the fox. So the next ones we bought Point de Lay, and we had been selling Connolly's organic eggs in the shop. I went to Connolly's and I bought Point de Lay eggs off of them. So for the next year and a half, we had the sister chickens of Connolly's. Now I had a small amount of chickens, so we'd also be buying in Connolly's. But the difference because ours were out in the woodland and the forest, they were doing grazing, we were giving them a mixture of feed. So the exact same chickens, the difference in the eggs was unbelievable. Our yolk would stand twice the height and be twice the orangeness sitting off of the pan. So when you crack it in, your yolk just sits there in the middle and your egg stays in the centre. So that's the same chickens. And then if you take a conventional egg and crack that in, it just goes like water across the pan.
And the fox love the nutrient dense hens as well, I bet that.
Well, like we also need to retrain people. So like when we go up home to our family, we could bring up some of our own pork or some of our own chickens. They won't eat it because it tastes too strong for them. So people are so used of really light flavoured meat and industrially bred meat that they don't know what good quality meat is, and they can't handle it a lot of the time.
Yeah, raw milk is the same. You see people who said, I couldn't drink.
Sean, on your chickens, so what you did is you fermented their feed.
Yeah.
So basically that's same as the sourdough bread. It's nutritious, it's more nutritious. So it's what we would say in natural farming is that if you could put IMO4 into that with, it's just all about fermentation. And basically it's rich and nutritious. So, and it's the taste, and Thomas is right, like you can have we buy the organic egg and we try to have it, but the fox always takes our eggs, or the chicken, sorry. But it's the taste, and taste is everything. But I would say the fermentation, will keep fermentation on the feed, and you'll make money.
No, and I think so. And it's funny, there's a lady speaking on the Tuesday Biofarm, Emma Nalumian. She's from Uganda, and I got the idea from her. And you're right, it is fermentation. But it struck me as really interesting. We discussed this in the pub last night, that if we talk about this being knowledge sharing and knowledge, like what I find is that maybe the innovation needs to come from the farmers themselves rather than having somebody outside tell us this. You know, we've spent 50, 80 years of an advisory system, and somebody said it's a very poor advisory system, and it is. But it's a poor advisory system that's paid by an external model that sells you stuff that maybe we need to, and Johnny Green mentioned, he said it's not knowledge transfer, it's knowledge sharing, it's people of an equal thing. And I think it was Garoj, he's still here, said today that in the farm walks, the group dynamic doesn't necessarily always work because they were dissing what he was doing. But when he got them on his own and they were able to talk one-to-one, it was a completely different thing. And I think we have to start getting back to that model where farmers are talking to farmers about things, and maybe it's a suggestion. Maybe why don't you try this, or why don't? And you know, I think that whole thing is a much, much better approach. And as Thomas there said, in many ways we're all scientists. You know what I mean? But it's the science of observation as well that gets to that. And I think the nutrient density one is a very hard nut to crack, because it's a bit like how do you know have you carbon sequestered? You might have carbon in your ground, but does it move? But if you do everything else right, is that a given that if your soil is properly managed, does that not mean you produce nutrient-dense food?
I think you can get caught up in trying to find a single measurement for nutrient density.
Absolutely.
And if you do, then you've already lost the conversation, because science will turn around and the industry will turn around and will give you a whole load of measurements to say it's not. Again, if you have the quality of the food and you have healthy animals and healthy
Yeah,
people.
we had an earlier discussion today about how you measure, it was in the talk on environmental services for agriculture. But, and one of the big problems is we haven't got around to this idea. We can't measure everything. And if I was making the point that, you know, if you want farmers to grow good hedges, you don't penalise them for not having a fence, regardless if the hedge grows or not. But in the same way, do we not need to really say, if my soil is right, everything else will work? If we could agree on what soil health is and a measurement, biodiversity happens as a consequence. But also, I would imagine high quality food, we can call it nutrient density or complex, it doesn't matter. But if the soil is right, kind of everything else works. We have better drainage, we have healthier crops, and we probably have healthier farmers. And maybe happier farmers.
Sorry, do you think we should have that? I totally agree with what you said there, right? But on the other hand then, should there be a better connection between the consumer and the farmer from the point of view of if they could even, I won't say come on the farm, Sean, but to a certain extent to see actually what's actually being done in this country as regards the quality of the food through natural methods being grown?
Yeah, I think so. I do think technology comes in there, though, in the sense of I don't think it's completely feasible to say that you can bring everybody to that state.
No, I don't.
But I think, you know, if we got to a stage where we're honestly farming and we're honestly doing things properly, I think that information will get out through different modes of social media.
The knowledge has to come back then through the consumer as well. The consumer needs to be educated from the point of view of knowing what quality food is.
Yeah. And they will dictate what you're going to grow.
Like the heading today is low input, nutrient dense food. That's a very good idea with the fermentation. That's mainly the difference with our chickens as well, is we took our grain and rather than giving the grain to the chickens, we sprouted it, put in some salt water, let it ferment for a week, and then that's what we were feeding them. So we took just a carbohydrate that was inside in the grain, we sprouted it, became proteins and enzymes, and then we put salt water to that and let it ferment in that for a couple of days and fed it out to the chickens. And the difference in the quality of the eggs, like that's a direct thing there straight away. But I mean, the real important thing is the relationship people have with food. They don't know what good food is anymore, so we have to try and re-educate them. And again, that's through the schools and that's through having access to good quality food.
Yeah, and unfortunately the health sector has turned a blind eye to this for so long, and it's an absolute win-win if you could reduce your hospital burdens and your health burdens through quality food. It's, you know, when you see, I think the biggest thing or the worst thing, or you could say the biggest effort they've ever made was maybe not to have 5 chip shops within 400 yards of a school. You know, it's all right to have 4, but you don't have 5. So, you know, they haven't come to this line yet that there's a value in food as a health product.
To be honest, I think they came to that a long time ago, but it doesn't benefit the industry and
Well,
the profits and all.
It's a little bit like the egg supply trade. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. There's
just a kind of a comment. First of all, I think Dorina used the word nourish, which I think is a very powerful word when you think about human nutrition and also the health of our soils and environment. So I think it's a really good word. And anybody who's here at lunchtime will know all about nourishing food. I haven't been hungry since, Dorina. You'd be glad to know having ate your delicious lunch. But I think the point I'd like to make, and you touched on it there, Sean, as well, is that I know when I started in this business, it was all about, for us, biodiversity was the big push, and you know we have our community around nature and biodiversity. Now it's all about carbon. It's all about what we're going to do for carbon, almost regardless of biodiversity. And I've been at so many meetings where when you talk about the environment now, you're really talking about climate, and we've forgotten about biodiversity to some degree. But actually the third crisis out there isn't spoken about as much, and that's the food and nutrition crisis. There's obesity at one end, there's starvation at the other, and then there's all these hidden deficiencies as well. And I think that's a whole different argument. And sometimes I think what you said there about getting it right, if you get it right in the soils, you get more. That's where the nutrition and nutrient density comes from. That's where the water is held. That's where the soil biology and the above ground biodiversity comes from. That's where the carbon is sequestered. So I think we're maybe all talking about the same issue, but we're talking about it in separate conversations. And it's, I think, to shape a more powerful narrative and to address the urgency of these 3 crises, we need to be funneling them into one cogent argument. So it's just a comment. Thank you.
No, that's it. Thanks. And James wants to have a here.
It's just this conversation is very similar to a conversation I heard among researchers about 4 weeks ago at the Euragri conference. And in the European Horizon Europe multi-billion euro funding stream that's on board now at the moment, there's 5 big, what they call missions that are supposed to lead the research agenda. And one of them is the soil and food mission. And it was researchers talking about these questions, about it all coming back to the soil quality. And if you think that measuring nutrient-dense food is complex, when you put them researchers into a room and talk soil quality, so we're quite a way off. But since there is such an investment in this now, one of the things they talked about in these missions, they're supposed to operate different than any other research before. They're supposed to involve what they call these lighthouse farms. They're supposed to be set up in partnership with farmers on the ground. So that research program is being drawn up at the moment. There'll be multiple calls over the next 3 or 4 years, and I think there's a real space for this conversation to happen in that space and have answers shortly in the space of a 3-year program. The European Union is investing in answering these questions on the link between soils, nutrition and health in this large soil and food mission, So I think there is the information that you guys have here, it would be gold within that and speed up the process of adoption so much. And they want to actually try and encourage that, but I think you need to be on it.
Yes, but will that funding be swallowed up by the semi-state companies or from out-of-town PhDers?
That's the worry, So that's why they have to be set up and engaged, and the lighthouse farms need to be year farms, and it's the ones that are doing the research on year farms, And this is what we did point this out as well, that then you have the farm is being used as a tool and just being used as another lab, and the expense isn't being coming back to the farmer. So they have to change it the way that you're the ones doing the research.
That is done all over Europe, right? I am so envious of what's going on in Europe, okay? And it is not allowed in this country.
Well, you actually just described the Talamh BioEIP on soil and biodiversity that we're going to be starting. We'll have 16 lighthouse farms, and it's about educating the farmers on how the soil biology works and putting them in charge of it, and then being able to show the above ground effects of improving what's happening under the soil. And that it's not something that's external to them that needs experts. You need experts to help teach us and tune our senses, but that we can see the effects above ground in our animals and our crops of increasing the below ground biodiversity.
And it's actually examples from Switzerland and Portugal that we're using in what they were showing up needs to be done, and was on farms in them cases, and Austria. So I totally agree with you, but I wonder what's the barrier that's stopping it from happening here, or how can it be facilitated? I think there would be a real appetite.
Right? And I've said it to Sean.
Yeah.
I looked into this a couple of years ago myself to know, could I get involved in something that was going on through FEEBLE, okay? And it was through the EU countries. And when I went about it, I was shot down because there was 2 PhD students from Portugal had swallowed up all the funding through UCD, and I was basically not in the hierarchy to have anything to do with it.
I think citizen science is going to change a lot of stuff, and farmers engaging at that level. And as far as I know, now most of the funding comes from the European Union. It's not that it's just all academic. It has to be paired with on-the-ground farmer experience. So the farmers are becoming more of an integral part of the research.
It has to look at systems, and which is not doing at the moment. It's looking at all the individual elements, and that doesn't reflect the complexity of the systems that we're talking about. There is one kind of slightly bright thing, and it was referenced here yesterday, which is that the department's soil sampling, the 10 million that they're putting into soil sampling, which is going to be far more in depth than, this is going to be full Albrecht sampling, total sampling, a breakaway from the orthodoxy of, say, the Teagasc school of sampling, and I don't think Teagasc are actually, I don't think they've even got the gig for the sampling, so, that might just be a wake-up call for them.
Yeah, and I think maybe that is an issue, is the competition for funding among all groups, but I think there's a lot of disillusionment, I think particularly about, we'll say, for want of a better word, the non-standard farmers looking at research monies, because a lot of it now is designed in a way. The EIPs are the only one I see that are different. A lot of them now are designed that they're high wheeling. You have to huge investment. You have 6 months. You have to cover the cost 6 months ahead of that and hope you get the next tranche of payments to cover that. And county councils have been very clever on this. A lot of the time they're vying for that money now as well, along with other agencies. So it is a difficult one to work. I do think the EIPs are different, and Brendan was explaining some stuff to us about what's going to happen for high nature value that will potentially have an interesting take on how things will happen in the future as well, with it's almost a subsidiarity thing done. I don't know how well it'll work. I only heard about it yesterday. Sorry, Thomas.
Last year I could see the massive difference in my place, and I said I need to get someone in to. Chris was on to me. He says you need to get someone in to do the trials on it. So I was bold enough to. I rang UCD, I rang Trinity, and I rang a place in Cork as well, and universities. And the first one, UCD, told me, "Oh, you should get on to Teagasc." I says, "Are you listening to me at all?" And then UCD said you should get on to Moorpark, and I said, "I don't think you're listening yet." So then I sent, and she said, "Send me an email, what you're doing, blah, blah, blah," and never heard from them. So then I said, I remember pulling in at the Skinnet, it's outside Ballingarry. Anyway, long story short, I rang the place in Cork, and I got onto the head of the biology there, and he comes on to me and he says, "I don't know who you are, you 5 minutes." And I was still talking to him 25 minutes later, and he was the head of the biology department. He says, "I have a lecture in 5 minutes, blah, blah, blah." I told him what I was doing, how I was enriching my soil, and I'd like to get one of his students out for maybe once a week or whatever to come out and log it. And he said, "Stop." And he said, "Stop." He said, "The way you're treating your soil and the way you're farming your soil is the right way to treat it, but off the record," and he said it 3 times to me, he said, "Off the record," he says, "if I send anyone down to you," he said, "I lose my job and I lose my funding." So I know everyone in here is connected, and this is, look, I tell the truth, and that is the truth. And fair dues to him for saying it, but it was a big kick in the guts for me that day. But we just have to keep trying.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I have one last woman here who wants to have a word, and then we're going to go to final reflections.
Hi, Elva here from Brookfield Farm in Tipperary. It's really interesting, the connections that people are making between food, nourishment, but it's also the food system as well, is that we need to look at other countries where the supermarket model doesn't have the dominance that it has here, because it's not in the interest of a lot of commercial entities that the food that's being sold in supermarkets, that it's nutritionally dense and that it comes unprocessed directly from farmers. It's in the interest of a lot of commercial entities that food is highly processed with a very long shelf life, and it doesn't come directly from farmers. So that is a really important thing to put into the mix. That needs to change at policy level. And to be fair, the EU does seem to have recognised that they're looking at the farm-to-table model. How that's going to play out in actual funding for real farmers, we have to wait and see. Yeah.
Thanks, Elva. Gentlemen, we're coming to the last little bit. Comments?
Do you want us to sum up, is it?
Each, yes, please.
Okay. I don't know, I think really when it comes down to it, it's about going back to nature, understanding how biology and biodiversity works. It's about bringing our food system back to the community, that it's community over commodities and people over profit, because food needs to become part of the centre of our community again, because if we want to have a culture into the future, it needs to be based on the food that we're growing within our country. One of the reasons I took over the farm, wanted the farm in Kerry, is I wanted to be more of a Kerry man. I don't want to do that. I needed to eat more of the ground. So, well, it's funny, but it's not. It's true, because every atom in your body replaces itself every 7 years.
Yes.
You're made up of your environment and what you consume. And if we want an Irish culture, we need to be eating Irish food, not stuff that's highly processed and brought in from around the world. And if we can get that connection back with people, I think the rest will follow.
Andrew?
Yeah, I think for me, for the moment, until the kind of technology comes along that is measuring nutrient density easily and putting a value on it with, the kind of the buyers who are buying, say, commodity crops from me, like malt and barley or that, I don't, with the exception of, actually, you refer to Waterford Distillery, and they also take barley from me, which they're very happy, not as happy as they are with Trevor stuff, but they're also very, very happy with it. It's, you know, it's some of the best stuff that they're getting, but they don't actually pay me anything extra for it. But in the meantime, I need basically to build relationships with buyers who, for whatever reason, have faith that there is the density in that, and that's the only way for me to progress in the short term until that's there to measure. And you just you touched on the communication with consumers, and that's really important. And I think Farming for Nature should get credit for the work that it's doing. I think I think this is the way that we have to go. Open up our farms, invite people in, communicate with them, let them know the good stuff that we're doing that is not necessarily fitting into any scheme or any method of certification, but it's just a very good way to farm.
Farmers coming out of the closet.
Yeah, I think in fairness, this is fantastic, okay? And if it could be pushed a bit more and got out there to the public. The problem isn't that we're not producing nutrient-dense food, John, whether it is biodynamic or organic or anything. The quality of the food is there, okay? Because it's grown under specific guidelines. The problem is that we're a thorn on the side of industry as such, because we don't buy fertilizers or fungicides or anything like that. And look, there's a market for everything, okay? No, they'll paint a bad picture that, you know, we're not going to feed the world and stuff like that, but you know, statistics can be skewed to whatever way you want the result to come from them. But I would think that if anything is going to come from any of this, it's an interaction between the people who are growing the food to get across of the quality of the food, and the likes of the Doreen Allens and things like that there that can have the contact with the consumer, and it's that gap in the middle that has to be, that people have to say, right, we got the bread there, it might be from Mark Galander's, the flour, or the butter that's going on it, which is fantastic, is from the Crawford's farm down there. It's all the stories, it's bringing the whole thing together, because what you have then is the consumer then builds up, I won't call it an ownership, but it's like they become part of the story as well.
Yeah, and would it be fair to say that at a production level, we've increased the capacity to grow nutrient-dense food? It's just the market element of it hasn't caught up with it yet.
Yes.
In the sense that, you know, if the three of you are almost representing biodynamics, biological and organic, there is, you're all basically selling the same message, in the sense that if we get our soil health right and we create that good healthy soil, that in turn will create good healthy food. But apart from, we'll say, Thomas, who can achieve that through direct marketing in a short supply chain, the bigger market potentially has to change to accommodate and to pay ye a premium for what ye need to do. Would that be fair?
Yeah.
Which is an interesting thing. It's almost like farmers are dictating the pace now, which is something.
And just remember, there's a lot more money coming for organics, Sean, and for more people to get into organics, which means that you end up with if it is controlled in a right way, you could actually have a larger volume of stream of quality nutrient-dense food coming to the consumer on a more regular basis.
Yeah, I agree, but I think is the capacity gap from the ability to market it, but also the understanding from, we'll say, consumers, but also health policy providers, that an understanding of what the benefits of a nutrient-dense food could be.
Yes, but there is a reluctance from the other cohort of farming.
But I think again, that's a solution from farmer to farmer that will happen if the market dictates.
We're in the situation we're in now because of 30, 40, 50 years of a particular framework around agriculture. It was a commodity basis. There's actually plenty of money in the food system to pay farmers, but the money is being taken off in other areas of it. There's a lot more middlemen there, there's a lot more, it's going to corporations and companies, and the food system is designed in extracting that wealth out for external profiteers, or shareholders, I meant to say, external shareholders rather than the community. So there's actually, Christine Jones did a chart, it was at one of the biofarms, and she showed the money that's in the agricultural system, in the food system, and it's way up there, and it's only like 5% of that goes back to the farmer. You know, and they were able to do that because they were able to disconnect the consumer from the farmer. You used to have local markets, you used to have local laboratories, you don't have those anymore. Now you have 3 or 4 stages, and when the consumer goes into a supermarket and they're looking at the products, there's billions and billions that goes into the PR and the marketing to convince them or fool them that the product they're buying is directly from a farmer or is nutrient dense or is this or that. But actually all we need to do is bring honesty back into the food chain, because a lot of the consumers, if they're given a real choice, will make the real choice around the food.
Okay, well maybe that's where to leave it. And I want to thanks. Can we give everybody a good round of applause there, please?
I think there's room for a bigger, longer discussion there, definitely, Sean. Thank you so much, Sean, for hosting that. Thank you so much to the 3 panel. I'm just going to invite Brendan Dunford up just to have closing remarks on today's session, if that's possible. Thanks again. Big Boolabus.
So I'll only be literally 2 minutes. That was a real rock star panel and chair as well. It was superb, really superb. I enjoyed every bit of it. So thank you so much, and for the contributions from the floor as well. I just wanted to kind of sum up and talk a little bit about farming for nature, given that we're here and we'll be back here later on as well. I suppose the whole purpose of farming for nature, the initiative, was to try and reframe the negative narrative around farmers as complainers and as ones who are wrecking the environment, and to sort of present a more positive, solution-orientated story around how farmers are actually the solution and not the problem. That's what we set up to do. And you can see where we were coming from if you listen to the conversation today. The innovations, the solutions, the creativity, the passion, the connection, it's all there. So I think the problem is we're not reaching a big enough audience, isn't that it? Isn't that you have to be conscious of the audience out width of the room and how you reach out into that audience. And the more we go on, I think, you know, the more important I realise what we do, but the more frustrated I get about our need to do it at scale and with urgency. So it's quite frustrating. One thing I think that we can do maybe better is in terms of the cooperation, because there's so many wonderful organisations, and we have this amazing biofarm happening in a couple of weeks' time with Sean, led by Sean, which is a phenomenal event, I think, in terms of information sharing. We have Base Ireland, who are an incredible group of people and who sort of really define what it means to be kind of knowledge sharing amongst each other. We have Talamh Bio, it was mentioned there, but they have a really interesting EIP coming up about, you know, using these lighthouse farms, and I think that's another wonderful opportunity as well. And I think all of us doing these little things, but doing them together and maybe pushing on will be part of the kind of future pathway. So in terms of farming for nature and what we hope to do in the next couple of years, and it's really Bridget and Lucy who are driving a lot of this work. There is a lot of work in it. It's really continuing to profile farmers as problem solvers, as, you know, the first responders to the crises that we face at the moment. Getting those farmers, because they're so eloquent and capable, out into the media, at conferences, into local radio, newspapers, on RT radio, on RT television. So getting those people placed in the media with advice from people like Hannah and hopefully later Ella as well, trying to get those stories out more commonly so that people can think positively about the situation that we're in and the ability to reform it. We're also hoping to kind of do a little bit in terms of knowledge sharing through webinars. We've had great webinars last year on every Monday night, I think it was. Farm walks throughout the season if we can. COVID put a bit of a spanner in our works tonight, unfortunately, or last year, unfortunately, but I think we'll be bouncing back in that front as well. And organising events like at least this every year. And Sean, we had a great chat last night about how do you organise a really different type of a conference? So we might come back to that as well. But we're hoping to do that. We're also hoping, if possible, and if you're interested, trying to deepen this network somehow. So we have, 60 or 70 ambassadors now who are just phenomenal, nearly in every county in Ireland. So it's trying to, because you can sometimes feel quite alone in this journey. So it's about, knowing that you're not alone, that there's other people backing you, doing what you do in the way that you do it. So try and deepen that network and expand it, because we're part of Europe now. So this year we're delighted to announce that, like in Austria, there's a Farming for Nature ambassador program this year, also in Croatia and in Lithuania. And it's this notion of, having not just an Irish network, but a European network, which is more clout in terms of policy and in terms of research and things like that. So I think we've hoped, but we'd love to hear from yourselves as ambassadors and as people who are interested in farming for nature and sustainability about what we could do and how we could do it better, because we're really keen to play our part, and it's only one part. The other quick thing I thought was fantastic about today is reimagining the role of the farmer. And I think you've all seen that the farmer, not just as food producer, but also the farmer as this ecosystem service provider in the language that we used, but as a scientist. And Tommy made that point really well, I think, the farmer as a scientist on the ground, a citizen scientist. There's a lot of money in research, and farmers don't seem to be getting that much of it, and they should be, because they're actually the ones who can inform the research, but also apply it at the other end. And of course, farmers as educators and teachers, and I think that's a great thing as well. There's, we talk a lot about tourism, but we also talk about ecotourism, and even going beyond that, the authentic educational experience. And you'll not get a better experience than going onto a farm with a farmer to learn that. So there's that broader role is really fantastic, and I thank everybody today and yesterday as well who made that a reality. So that's it. We're going to reconvene a little bit later. I'd like to thank particularly our volunteers in the back who've been making the teas and coffees, some of them pretending that they're working. And of course, Johnny and Paul on sound and vision, and of course Lucy and Bridget, who have pulled this event together. We're going to reconvene at 7:30 for a lovely, beautiful evening of celebration with Ella McSweeney for our Ambassador Awards. And actually, for those people who are receiving their Ambassador Awards tonight, maybe between 7:30 and 9? No, between 6 and 7, if you could stick around, we just want a few photographs from you. And I think that's it. Hopefully you'll have a lovely evening. There's a cheese tasting on somewhere in Kinvara for those who are going. But otherwise, have a nice dinner or pint, whatever you're at. And feel free to stick around. See you at 7:30. Have a tea or coffee if you want. Thank you very much.